Well, indeed, welcome everyone. It is so good to see so many familiar and some unfamiliar faces around this table as we welcome our presenter tonight, Pastor CeCee Mills. I will tell you, you're in for a treat if you don't know Pastor CeCee. Wherever she is, revival happens. As a parish pastor, as a Synod staff person, someone has served as chaplain for every kind of event in the ELCA and through ecumenical partnerships. She has been in a traditional congregation. She's done a mission probe, and everywhere she goes, she tells the story of Jesus, and revival happens. And so tonight, as my colleague Karen and our generosity team gather us for this first opportunity to interact with Pastor CeCee, to learn from her and from one another, I'm really excited for revival to happen in our Delaware-Maryland Synod and in our partner synods around us as we think again about generosity with an eye toward the urban context. And I don't want to offend any who don't come from the urban context, but I will tell you, as a parish pastor of 20 years myself, Jesus lives in the city. I know because I've met him there many times, and having those encounters inspires me to generosity as well. Pastor CeCee is not only a pastor of the church, but she is a very proud mom. And your son's name is Joshua, as I remember, correct? Yep. And Joshua, the way Pastor CeCee talks about him, every now and again, I think, he must be like 15 or 16 years old because he is his mama's baby. But in fact, a young adult who has got tremendous gifts and blesses his mom's life just as she's going to bless us tonight. So Pastor CeCee, welcome. We're so glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I'm excited to see all of you. I do not ever purport to be an expert on anything except for being myself. So the things that we are going to share in community. And I pray that what happens is that God does something that helps you to know who you are in God and what that means as far as relating to others. So as I always do, I'm going to start us off with a word of prayer. The Lord is with you.
And also you.
Good and gracious God, we praise and thank you for the gift of life and for this opportunity to come together and to learn. We thank you in advance, Lord, for the way that you will edify our mind, body, and spirit so that we might be about your expansion of the kingdom in the places where we serve. We thank you, Lord, for the grace you have bestowed upon us and the mercy that you extend to us. We ask now that you allow your Holy Spirit to guide and direct our conversation this day so that we might please you in submitting, Lord God, to the mission that you have given us. Ready us for the path ahead. Give us new ideas, new ways of being so that we might always acknowledge you and give you the glory as we accomplish your work. Lord, and I pray that you allow the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart to be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Tonight we are under the heading of the common good, a generosity model with the community at its center. And I hope to illuminate to you some things that are biblically based that will help us not just in urban settings, but in partners who have partners that happen to be in urban settings, as well as in some of our suburban and even rural things. I think there will be things that you can take from this time together and utilize at your own space. But I want all of us to understand that we do not do this as a silo, that we do this in partnership with God and in partnership with one another. So I'm going to start with looking at Nehemiah Chapters 1 and 2. Our key verse for this evening is, "Then they said, let us start building." So they committed themselves to the common good. Nehemiah was a cupbearer for the king, which meant that Nehemiah did not want for anything. Nehemiah lived in the palace and had the favor and protection of the king. Nehemiah needed not do anything to make his life more comfortable. He had everything. But Nehemiah wanted to know about how the things were going as far as the reconstruction and the rehabilitation of God's promised land. And when Nehemiah asked someone about it, they told him things that grieved his heart. He heard them. He heard how things were in disrepair and things were in ruin. And unlike some of us, he didn't begin to blame those who were living alongside those places that were not restored. He began to grieve in his heart for his own part, despite the fact that he had personal comfort by living in the palace. His heart was discomforted that God's promise had been given to God's people and the mission lay incomplete. He cried audible tears, I believe. He wept at this idea that it somehow was not done. Nehemiah, someone who had a particular place that he had no need to put his body, to put his position in jeopardy. But indeed he did. He decided that this thing that was so overcoming him to the point that the king looked upon his countenance and saw his grief, that he would take that opportunity to use it to finish God's mission. When the king looked upon him, I imagine because they were so close, because who would you trust better than the person who is meant to help make sure that you're not poisoned? That they had developed a rapport, a relationship. Because of Nehemiah's faith, I imagine that some of their conversations went towards Yahweh and Nehemiah talking about the things and the ways of God, that the king had confidence and apparently some type of affection and care and compassion for him. As when he saw him grief-stricken, he asked him what was going on. Nehemiah unselfishly did not use his favor for the king to get him a life that was apart from God's people, but saw that this was his responsibility. This was part of his own call in being a person of God, that he was called to restore the wall that would protect the land that had been returned to the people of Israel. He talked to the king and he asked the king to give him a letter that would allow him to go about and do the things that would help restore this wall. He had the insight, he had the self-awareness, he had the communal awareness to recognize that he needed to have something that gave him the authority to be there. Now, this could have been a risk. It could have been an offense to the king, who himself could have understood himself as the same position of any god, that Nehemiah should worship and serve him. But the king granted this favor. So Nehemiah went out and he took some people with him and began to inspect the walls. I imagine that his grief must have grown as he laid eyes on the things that had only been described to him to that point. He looked at the disrepair and possibly the disconnect of the community and knew what his mission was going to be. That he had to be about getting the people of God together so that all might know the protection of having the wall restored. That despite his safety, despite his security, that he recognized that the kingdom of God was more expansive than his own self, and that indeed for the sake of the community, for the sake of the glorification of the God he loved, they needed to be about that mission. So after they had gone and looked around, they began to develop a strategic plan to be able to accomplish the things of God. And hopefully you are familiar with the story of Nehemiah as we come to the verse that is our key verse, where they decided to let's start building. That indeed, as they started building, there were enemies all around them. There were people who wanted to stop the building, who wanted to take their very lives. And so the scripture goes on to tell us that yes, they built with one hand and they restored with one hand, but they had a weapon in the other. As we began this journey together, and we look at the people of God in this text, I want you to think about those things. How Nehemiah came to encounter and understand his mission as one that was apart from his own personal circumstance. As Nehemiah called the people together and commissioned them to be a part of the rebuilding of this wall. What does that mean for us on this side of the return to the promised land? What does that mean for those of us who are on this side of the resurrection? How does this text speak to us? So I want to send you to small groups just to think about that, using that key verse. Where the community is gathered together, they recognize the weight and the task before them. And they are guided by this servant, and their response to his commission to come and restore the wall is, let us start building. And then their commitment was to the common good. Because imagine some of them were in parts of the wall that were not in disrepair. Some of them were in places that they had been there for some time and they already had things growing and they were bustling, and they would have to go back to the despair that they felt when they had no place for the sake of the common good. So I want you to think about where do you see God in this text? And then the second question, what does this text teach us? What does this text inform us about living in community? So we're going to give you about 15 minutes, and Karen is going to send us away into small groups. And then we'll come back and do some reporting out. So while you're together, if you want to get a spokesperson identified, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll simply ask that you let us know. So pay attention to your group number as you go into your small group, and we will have you report out by your small group number. Thanks, Karen.
And I would recommend, CeCee just took it down. I was going to suggest you take a picture of that slide.
I'm getting ready to paste it.
She'll paste it into the chat. I was going to do that, but I was setting up the room. So I'm going to send you to your rooms now. You may be required to click I accept and go off to your room. So have fun talking about how is God in this text, and then what does this text mean? And you'll see those in the chat for the deeper questions. Thanks so much. Goodbye, everybody. Glad to have you all coming back. We're back to recording, and in a moment, I think we're about ready.
We're ready. Here we go. So just as you feel inclined to share, where did you see God in the text? What were some of the responses that you gave or heard?
A vision. He was a vision to build collectively.
Okay.
Yeah, and giving gifts and bringing everyone together for the common good.
Okay. There are no wrong answers, so I'm going to start picking on people that I know.
I can go. We also focused on the let's do this together thing. So it's a communal thing. It's not like we are going out there to help somebody. It's doing it together. And common good, and who all is common good. So I started out by sharing with my group that this Nehemiah text, I once preached on this because I'm German. And so the fact that Nehemiah goes back to the city and the very first thing he wants to do is build a wall It's really just hit me the wrong way. And I preached against this wall building and all the walls in the world that are doing so much damage right now. So I had to get out of that mindset. But it really then is the question, who is the common good? Who is common in the common good? Nehemiah obviously thought it was just the children of God who are Jews. And the Bible's very clear that it's all children of God that should be part of the common good.
So let's shift to the second question, thinking about that, the common good. What does this text teach us about living in community?
Takes commitment. There's committed is one of the words.
Yes. Commitment. What else?
Sharing our gifts and talents.
Sharing, yes.
It's hands-on. It's not just make them feel good or give them Jesus. It's hands-on. Build something.
Yeah.
Yes.
The living in
know
community
that,
is.
Did you say something,
one
Regina?
person. Yes, I was saying that we're all in it together. It's not just one person that's going to be in charge and do everything.
Right.
We're a community, so we all have to work together towards a common goal for the common good.
Yes. What were you saying, Atticus?
Yeah, that it's not just building together, which is a really exciting and amazing part of life together, but it's also struggling together and suffering together and just continuing to walk together, even in the highs and the lows.
Thank you.
And to add to that with the commitment, it's like giving our all. We're not in this for ourselves. We're in this for everyone. It's not about what I as a person, as an individual can do. It's what we're doing together to accomplish the common good.
And I see also leadership in here because he's saying, hey, let's. It's not, I think you guys should. Let's delegate to someone. He says, I'm doing this, who's with me?
Yeah.
Well, this is just like Mark said. He said, come to do the work building a wall for our safety, find the hope, one vision community that pulls together to build that wall.
Yes. Yes.
And seeing community working together.
Yeah.
Pulling people together to work and not pull each other apart.
Yes. One of the words that strikes me from this is the sacrifice, because Nehemiah had to become vulnerable and be willing to sacrifice, being with the king. He could have offended the king. At that point, I think he would have been killed because he had offended the king. Going out there and being vulnerable to whoever were the enemies of those people who were trying to build, he put himself in a vulnerable position. So part of it is absolutely building together, but it's also having a communal sense of insecurity. If one is insecure, then we're all insecure. It reminds me of a congregation. There's one deaf church in the ELCA. It's called Bread of Life. And so their members are predominantly deaf people who cannot hear. And the pastor was sharing with me the way they do things is they slow things down until everybody gets it. They won't move forward until everybody gets it. And that he shared that way of being is something that those of us in the hearing world could really learn. Is that if everybody's not there yet, if everybody hasn't reached whatever that initial step, that initial way of being, then we ought to slow down until that one is able to understand, is able to become a part of it, and is able to do it. That to me is the best example that I've seen recently of having a common good, of being just willing to have the patience to wait and to be aware of that person.
I like that you, I like that you lifted up or just highlighted the word vulnerable, that he made himself vulnerable. I feel like I've never seen communities more committed to caring and being for each other than among communities who really have the least and who are the most vulnerable.
Yes. That is absolutely what I have experienced as well, is that they're more generous. They're more likely to give out of their scarcity than a person that may be of means. I think the ELCA, I don't know the statistics off the top of my head. They've done research in looking at specifically communities of color, and they may not give more as far as looking at the dollar amount, but they give more generously, more consistently, a higher percentage of what they have faithfully through the offering plate. So that is a lesson that we can hear and understand. But like I shared, that means sacrifice. And doing work with racial equity, we talk about how do you even things out? And even things out by somebody having to give some things up. And so by seeing ourselves as having this common good, it may mean that you have to be willing to sacrifice for the common good. I think that's a different way of looking at generosity, where most of the models that we see on generosity really look at how to get the highest dollar amount and don't really think about the common good. And so tonight we're really looking at a model that's going to encourage you to hold the community at the center and not the individual, or not even the church. Did y'all hear that? Not even the church should be at the center, but it should be the community for the common good. And I know that those of you who are in the Delaware-Maryland are familiar with a lot of the work that Mark has done at that particular church to help that community to kind of understand his being called to the community and not simply to those people who are part of that church. Right, Mark?
That's exactly right, Cece. No, I was really appreciating what you were saying. And that's one of the things we even lift up, even in our explicit conversations about stewardship, which, I mean, I don't know, we're growing in that area as we are in many areas. But when we ask people to donate, we say, like, listen, like, you know, we're asking you to make a commitment to support the ministry to this congregation. And there's also all kinds of other organizations doing all kinds of awesome things. And so, like, as far as we understand it, this is one part and maybe a beginning part of your discipleship and your generosity. But please do make plans and intentions towards other things that you see as important in our neighborhood and community. And we also designate like 6 partner organizations in the neighborhood to lift up over the course of the year and kind of tell their stories. So I really appreciate stewardship grounded in the broader vision. And yeah, so thanks for lifting that up.
Absolutely. So just to push forward a little bit, keeping that text at the center of kind of how we are thinking about this, I'm going to share my screen again. So here's some things I'm posing to you. I want you to look at this idea of generosity through the lens of the common good. And imagine yourself surveying the kingdom in your location. If you were to do like Nehemiah did, and remember Nehemiah, who was in the palace, he didn't bring a couple of people from the palace with him. He brought people from that community with him to go out and help him with the inspection. So I want you to imagine going out, whatever your location that you live in, as far as a community of faith. And I want you to think about these questions quietly to yourself. Would God be pleased? Where are the strongholds? And where is the vulnerability? So I want you to imagine yourself literally going out the doors of the church, through the parking lot, down the block, down the road, down the path, wherever it is that you live in, whether it's rural, urban, or suburban. When you look around and you think about how Nehemiah's heart was grieved, which we imagine is mirroring the heart of God, would God be pleased? Do you know where the strongholds are? Do you see where there's vulnerability? How are the people doing? Who is secure? Who remains vulnerable? Remember, though we don't like the idea of excluding people from God's kingdom, we can think of it in a broader way of the things that make us insecure as we live this American life. How are the people doing? Who is secure? Who remains vulnerable? And then thinking a little beyond that, when you look at the community, who are the ones that are ride or die, so to speak? Who are the ones that are out there in the midst of what's going on? Are you aware of what your neighbor's vision is? I think sometimes because we live in a capitalistic society, we tend to feel pity for those who we think are doing worse than ourselves. We don't see possibility in them. Oftentimes we feel sorry for them and want to rescue them. But do we ever bother to have the conversation? How do you imagine your life? Is this the beginning of where you want to be? Are you in the middle? What is your ultimate vision? How far are you from reaching it? Instead of imposing our vision upon them. What do you have to share to make your neighbor's vision a reality? What does your neighbor have to share to make God's vision for your community of faith a reality? I want us to think about this through the lens of the common good. Instead of just thinking about this as a way to raise funds or raise capital, what if our goal was to raise the common good? So in order to do that, we'd have to be like Nehemiah, and we'd have to go out into the community and begin to explore. We would assess our own assets. What are the assets that we have personally? We would assess the community assets through relationships with the community. Again, Nehemiah didn't go out there by himself, but went with the community. Assess community opportunities through relationships with the community. Assess community challenges through relationships with the community. So I had a congregation that was a mission congregation. I served in Virginia. And one of the things that we did when I first got there is we assessed our gifts. We did a gifts assessment to figure out what assets do we have. Now, we were a mission congregation. We didn't even have a building. We would go and meet at an adult mentally challenged camp for worship service. They had fly paper hanging with flies sticking to it. And so just looking at it outwardly, we didn't seem to have any assets. We couldn't ask the community to come for a carnival or something unless we made arrangements with the person we were renting week by week from. We looked at ourselves and we found it was a hodgepodge of God's creation. We had adult mentally challenged in our community. We had those who were living, I'd say, at least $10,000 below the poverty level in our community. We had those with advanced degrees, with masters and doctorates in our community. And we had this tag bunch that was coming together for the sake of God, wanting to create a relationship with the community. And we had to figure out, how can we get to know our community? Well, our number one thing, our first step, was brought to us by one of our youth. And the youth was like, go outside? Can we go outside and meet our neighbors? We had heard from some of those who were part of our team who had been in organized congregations who were thinking of marketing campaigns and sending out postcards and doing these things. And this youth, with the wisdom I say was from God, said, go outside. Go outside and meet our neighbor. And when we talked about it, one of the things that I insisted was, if we go outside and we're going outside to meet our neighbors, then we're not going out there simply to invite them to church. It's got to be about finding out what our neighbor has and figuring out how do we together become a community? How can we, not bringing our stuff into them or us simply seeing what they're doing and assessing it and creating that, but how can we together grow in relationship that we could be in partnership and that we would become a part of their community and not someone that was trying to access wealth or take gifts out of that community. And so one of the first things we did was simply to commit to doing one-to-ones with members in our immediate community, just to go outside and see who was there. We did a similar thing when I served in Virginia in the Norfolk area, and we had a congregation that asked me to come because they had heard about the things I had done at that first mission congregation, which we did a variety of things. We did things with the local library. We volunteered around voting precincts. We walked in the community that was immediately around us because the pastor previous to me had put these stickers in people's windows saying that our congregation was praying for them. And I said, well, why don't we just go to those places and actually pray with the people? And we began to get to know our community. That second congregation, what we did was we created a walking group where our goal was just to walk through the community, and we would stop and we would pray and we would say hi. And our goal each time we went out was to meet a neighbor, to have one neighbor that we had never met before and to meet them. And as we did that, again, not inviting them to the church, not trying to even have any deep conversation, just looking at their flowers, watching the kids, playing tag if we had to, just to be able to build a rapport so that we could get to know our community and they would see us not as leeches, not as people wanting to come in and extract, but true relationships that we wanted to explore and to create. The neighbors that we got to meet had many assets that would be beneficial to us as we went through different seasons at our church. And it was because we had made those connections that we were able to accomplish some of the missions that God had given us. But it all started with us beginning to know our neighbor and understanding the common good. Not only do I hope that you gain this understanding from this, but that you are able to explore partnerships with other people who are able to help with the common good. A lot of the congregations in the urban settings are in close proximity to each other. And so creating those relationships, creating those opportunities for partnerships can be easy. But we also have this thing called the ELCA and synods that give us an opportunity to create those types of things as well. Some of the things that I like to also encourage people to explore when they go out into the community is looking for opportunities for entrepreneurship, vocational discernment and training, real estate development, service needs, historical significance. And you say, CeCee, why would you name those things? Those things tend to be things that would help with the common good, undergird the common good, and help establish a sense of identity for that community. It becomes who they are. Knowing this community, appreciating it for its gifts, and seeing the opportunities of how we can help this community to know who we are so that we can build an authentic relationship that allows us to build upon these things. Other questions: what's the relationship between the community and elected officials? What's the relationship between the community and law enforcement? What's the relationship between community and major employers? If we're going to create something that's really sustainable, it's important that we know our neighbors, that we know the opportunities that are available, that we know the struggles that are there, that we not request this information as kind of an interview, but we know it because we have created a relationship that helps us to recognize the gifts and the strengths and the opportunities and the places where the wall is lying in disrepair. Further questions: how is the community accruing wealth? How is the community portrayed by media? How is the community supported by the budget locally, by the state, and federally? These are all the things that I'm equating to that time when Nehemiah went out and found out how the community was doing. These are the things that I think will help to undergird and expose the opportunities for congregations to find ways to be financially stable. Some of the ways that a congregation can be financially stable are coming from external partnerships. And so by looking at these things and knowing who your community is, it helps you to understand where they are in this season, where they are wanting to go in this season, and what type of support is already there for them to get there. I had a friend that worked at McDonald's, and my mom always used to give advice to any of the young people that came to our house, and they'd love for her to give advice. But I remember her talking about this person working at a fast food restaurant in a way that was shameful. She talked to him, and I think she was trying to give him words of encouragement, but told him, don't you want something better for yourself? Don't you want something more? At the time, I absolutely thought, because she had raised me, that this way of thinking made sense, that this absolutely made sense. And I remember years later, he was still working for McDonald's, but he was working in management by now. He was not in upper management. He wasn't an assistant manager or anything like that. He was like a crew leader. And I remember him coming by the house and seeing my mom and being afraid to tell her that he was still working at McDonald's, even though he was well into his 30s. That was one of the first times that I recognized the pain that is caused by someone else's vision being put on somebody else. And so he and I talked out on the front porch, before he was going to see Mom. I can't remember, I think she may have been out of the house. And he talked about that job like, I don't know, like he was Mariah Carey talking about singing. His whole face lit up. The joy in doing it. He talked about the customers that knew him by name, who came through the door, who he knew which ones needed physical assistance and what their order was going to be. As they're coming in the door, he's already calling it and allowing the crew to be able to prepare it because he sees them. He talked about the accuracy of his money counting and those things. And he talked about the ways that for him, he was appreciated in that place. But that place had no idea how much he felt his gifts were created for that work. He talked about growing up in a home where he was one of 7 children. He talked about going hungry and wanting to provide for his mother. He talked about his sense of pride that when he was a teenager, how he went out and got a job and how much that shifted their way of living. And that his goal in life was not to have excess, but to have enough to have a small house and a car and to be able to take care of his mom. And he shared with me when he came to visit and he was in his 30s, how his mom was now living with him. He told me how he gave her permission if she wanted to retire early, but she kept working. And I recognized that my value system, the way I was taught what was important, was different from his value system. I watched how he talked about the ways that he influenced young people and talked to them, repeated some of the same words that caused him shame to them and encouraged them to further their education. What I also realized is he was an integral part of this community, and he was a welcoming source for them. He was a community asset, even if his salary will never reach 6 figures. Even if the gift that he gave was helping people to simply get in the door, or for someone that was hearing impaired to not have to be able to sign and write down notes and do all the things because there was someone that was familiar, to help those who were there to have pride in how they dressed and the things that they had on. And I saw evidence of all that in the way that he talked about it. And I knew that he was a world changer in a way that we couldn't imagine. So again, when I invite you to think about the common good, I want you not to put your vision on your neighbors, but to listen to their vision and to figure out, how does that make us the body of Christ? How are they the leg or the foot or what have you? And how is their gift adding to who we are? When you think about these things that are on the screen right now about accruing wealth and all of those things, in this capitalistic culture that we live in, you have to have money. So that doesn't mean that we ignore it, but we don't elevate those who have more and make those who have less to feel less. It's the common good. If I have it, you have it. So then what did you uncover when you went on your exploration? Where did you see God in all of this? Who is your neighbor? What is your neighbor's vision? How can you join in creating your neighbor's vision? Join in creating a collective vision for your community. Aim for resources that change lives and draw the community together. One more quick story. There's a congregation down in Savannah, and they had a building that was used for a polling place each election season. And part of the building grew in disrepair. I think it was like a walkway that was covered, and it was between 2 buildings, and it was starting to sag or do something. And the congregation itself had a few members, and they were trying to figure out how to either raise the money or to be able to borrow the money to cover the costs. When those who were coming there for their voting heard about the issue of the congregation, an anonymous donor paid for the whole thing, which was probably between $25,000 and $30,000. Because for that person who gave that gift, that was part of their community. That was not the church that they didn't attend on Sunday, but that was part of their community. And I think if we can find this way to have this collective vision with our community, then our resources will be collected together, so that we're worried about whether that person has 3 meals a day, and they're worried about whether the building is in a state of disrepair. It's a collective thing that allows their wants and needs to be valued. And for those who have more, just because they give more literally does not mean they have a greater place at God's table. God's table is made for the priesthood of all believers, so that we come together with our resources. So what I hope you hear is that if God gives you the vision and the mission to serve in that community, then you have to understand that the goal is to create this collective that helps not just keep God's mission in order, but takes care of the people of God who inhabit that area. So aim for resources that change lives and draw the community together. And I say that to say that sometimes we can spend $50,000 on something that no one will ever see or know that it happened. And it's not that that's a bad expenditure. But if we can take that same thing and put it to the common good and get a common vision, it may be used differently. In urban settings, the close proximity of your neighbors makes co-creation possible. In building resources in urban settings, that co-creation must be profitable. So possible and profitable. The dependency upon an offering plate is naive at best. A lot of the communities of color that I have either worked with or served will find a way. That's the only way I know to say it. Will find a way to do things. So if there's a vision, if there's a sense of mission, then they will find a way. And what I'm inviting us to is to find a way in partnership, so that we see that ourselves as co-creators, that we come together not with an idea of how to rescue or save this community, but we come and build relationships. And out of our collective assets, we take care of the common good. I suggest there are monetary geniuses in any given 5-mile radius in any large city. I have often said that I wouldn't mind if someone that lived in the public housing a block away from my house, one of those mothers who made that money, the small amount of money, work for her family to carry them through each month. I wouldn't mind if that person was president, because I think our budget would be balanced. A person with modest income does not equal a poor money manager. It is possible to have someone with modest income that's an excellent money manager. Find the vision God has planted in the community. The vision is already there, beloved. We are simply uncovering it, unleashing it, and showing it. Some partners must come from outside of the immediate community. Their commitment is not greater than anyone else's, even if the monetary impact is. Sharing in mission is a point for celebration, not shame. One of the things that I, as an associate director for evangelical mission, often champion is that the congregations that receive grant money should not feel like they need to be thankful that they're getting it from those with money. The way the ELCA works, we all give our mission support, and the grant monies that are coming are from the communal wealth. It's from the common good. So despite the fact that the number of dollars might be lower, I just shared earlier that the giving is higher in those communities of colors, but in any regard, it shouldn't be a point of shame. If someone has to access community wealth, there should be just as much of a celebration as when the biggest donor gives something. There ought to be a recognition that this is a source of pride, that we have enough to take care of all of the needs for the common good. So if we could just take about 10 minutes, I would say, just to think about this, and I'm going to cut and paste and stop sharing, and then we'll wrap up. What's the condition of the kingdom where you are serving? Where is the wall in disrepair, and where is it standing strong? And can you see God's provision? Can you see that God has provided what you need, the skill sets, the vision, the drive, the people? So if we can just go just 10 minutes, you will not get through all the questions, but that's okay. And then we'll come back and have a dismissal. All right, some brief reporting out. I am not going to call by groups, but just by someone who has something to share about that brief conversation. I know it was a lot of questions in a short amount of time. So whoever wants to share, or otherwise I'll just start calling names I see on my screen.
I think we were group 7, I guess, Scott, I think, maybe, probably. But one of the things that we talked about when we talked about the holes and where we're standing strong, and I'm thinking specifically St. Luke's and specifically the community of Hamden, one of the things that's beautifully strong is that we have a core group of folks that is engaged and connected and committed, and I mean, it's like working a second job. And all of these people are doing that, which is a beautiful thing. So we're blessed in that, and The other thing that is really kind of amazing is the fact that even though the world is crazy and weird and messy, and nothing is like it should be with regards to how the church is functioning right now, we still have people showing up that are new, you know, so God is faithful in presenting new bodies to a tiny little church on the street corner in the middle of Baltimore, which is cool.
Wow. That's nice. Others who want to share before I start calling names.
She did threaten y'all, you better get on it.
Thank you, my dear.
Oh, Lord. Okay, so I shared with my group how during this pandemic things have changed and how people have been willing to give more to church to make sure that our bills were paid, and how people have been willing, if we want to give out food, people are just willing to do things, you know. And we had one of the things we talked about, how we've benefited from having time to do like these webinars now that normally we don't have the time to do. And we've learned so much just by participating and getting ideas on how to keep our ministries working, you know. But I'm just excited about the way people are so willing to give in church now. You know, people call and say, I'm going to go online and pay, and put my offering in, you know, and so you don't have to beat them up or beg them, you know. They're just willing to do things for the common good.
Yeah.
You know, to make sure that the bills are paid, so that you don't lose your church and your mortgage is up to date. You know, so people are just willing to do things for the common good.
But I mean, that's very insightful. And I've tried to encourage other leaders that way, that people are especially generous right now. Yes. As much as we assumed, because we knew there would be loss of income and all of those things, there are a lot of people who want to help, who want to do things. And so Lutherans don't like to ask, but we definitely need to give people opportunities to be generous. Thank you. Mm-hmm. All right, Robin, because you have great hair.
Thanks, Greg. I'm actually going to share what Pastor Mark Parker at Breath of God said. He had to go to his pub theology. That's why he's gone. But what I really loved hearing about it is in his part of the kingdom, all the agencies are working together. So you have the schools and you have the churches and you have the nonprofits. Now, when all of that comes together, it does provide those most vulnerable with what they need. And I think that's just really cool when everybody is working together. I think that's where we are all blessed.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I call on Atticus? I know he's got to head out, but I would just love to hear your insight or just some of that story, because I know collaboration is all you're doing at North Avenue.
Definitely. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I was, Robin was making me think that we were just getting a sign made for the first time the other day, and I was trying to list the partners, and the list was so long that I had to ask Lee, who works with us, do we need to put all these names on here? But yeah, that to me is a place where the kingdom of God is really alive. People have been just so eager and ready to be in really authentic relationship with those who are most vulnerable right now. And that includes neighbors too, not just, sorry, my dog is freaking out. Sorry. Sorry, I have to go get her.
No problem. But he was going to say that includes neighbors, not just agencies that are big or other churches or things like that. So that's what's cool.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Cheryl.
Oh, and the dog is cute.
Okay. At our church, I go to the same place Eric does. And I think one of the things is how relationships pre-COVID have contributed to new things happening during COVID. And that has been a real surprise. One of the things that has changed is that there's a group in our community that we've affiliated with in the past, but not in this way, and they're called Food Not Bombs. And they're a great group. They are volunteers who go out and they get food and they make food and they take it to different parts of the Baltimore city where that is food insecure. And a lot of people get fed because of it. Well, their stove broke and they couldn't cook. And so they came to us during COVID. We're closed, only, we've been having our services outside, but not doing much in the church. And so they wanted to know, could they use our stove? And we said, sure. So they came in and they're being able to recreate, this great service to the community. And then in terms of seeing God's provision, we've been, yes, we've had people continue to give to us, but they have, out of just the generosity of their heart, they had 2 fundraisers for our church. Maybe they look at our building and they realize it's falling apart. I don't know. But
$25,000 for an extension,
Right. 2 fundraisers where they cooked and people from the community would come into our courtyard and take the food and, give donations. And, and it's this wonderful symbiotic relationship of just life together, and so it's just been really beautiful in terms of the relationships that have been created there. And so that's been really fun. And I have other stories about how we've been involved in the community too, but I think there's probably other people who want to talk, so I won't talk anymore.
From a sense of generosity, I just want to share, what a joy to hear words like life together and common good and community. And although there's a lot of, CeCe's given you lots of framework and questions, I just want us to continue to absorb those words, because those words reap generosity. So go on. Anybody else? We'd love to hear from anyone else. Andrea or Jeanette or.
Andrea, I already spoke earlier. I don't have to go twice.
I'm in a community that has changed drastically, and it's been quite a task to get our congregation to wanna. When I first started there, I just wanted to build a bridge out to the community, and they were closing the doors to the community. So with COVID-19, they've come to the realization that there are a lot of Hispanic families in need, and through our pantry, and my being the only person who speaks Spanish, I've been able to at least open the doors more to people in the community that do not speak the English language. So slowly but surely, as much as there's been some resistance, some of our congregation members have realized that we are responsible for, God has called us to be responsible for not only the inside of the church, but the people that are outside of the church. So I did share that it is an uphill battle. Having come from a Pentecostal background, I have no shame in going out there and speaking about the Lord and getting people into the church. So they are getting used to that part of me. And again, I said, that's my vision, to be able to build that bridge so that people, as opposed to closing the doors to them, we are inviting them inside. So I'm just saying, praying that God will keep helping and bringing more people, and I'm not gonna give up. I'm just, I feel that's what God has called me to do, and I'm gifted by the fact that I can bring the words of the Lord in different languages. So I'm just using that, and I just ask that you keep praying for me so that I could keep, bringing more people into our church, and bringing the vision into our congregation that we are to reach out It's
Mm.
no longer just
Mhm.
staying inside. We have to go out, go out.
Amen.
And that's so funny because it was never about staying inside. We just,
Exactly.
Just
Yes.
stay inside.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'm going to pray that you get some more bilingual people as well.
Thank you.
To welcome your neighbors as they come along. All right. So I want to shift.
We are bilingual, but not in a helpful way. Second language is German, and there's nobody in our neighborhood that we can reach out to.
I would love to see you have a conversation with a Spanish speaking person while you're speaking German.
Only on Pentecost. And listening to all your questions and to what all of you are sharing, it just makes me realize how far Zion still has to go. We just spent the last 5 years convincing them that they have neighbors. Because for so long, downtown was just businesses, and at night everybody empties out, and that's no longer the reality, and it took them forever to realize that. When we started there over 5 years ago, they were 4 months away from insolvency. Now they have money in the bank, but it's not because, they were more frugal, definitely, but it's because the right people died. Because they inherited over $200,000 from 3 different bequests in 3 years. So it's nothing that, and they count on that. Really at the budget means like, so how much money are we inheriting this year? So
those legacy gifts are important, but those legacy gifts should be doing more.
And there are a lot of groups that are using the building because we're right across from City Hall. The city's exercise program and wellness program happens at our church and other stuff, but it's always a rent-related thing.
Okay. Yeah. That's a temptation, especially with urban congregations, to try to sustain yourself with rent to neighbors. And
they do. The renting of their parking lot is a major line item budget, pays half the salary for a sexton.
Yeah. They rent it out to who, may I ask?
To people that work in the vicinity, because we're next to City Hall, courthouses, whatever. And so people that work there during the week rent the parking.
Okay.
Well, and I think that's a piece of entrepreneurship, but it's also a piece that we need to think carefully about. We've experienced in our synod, and I'm sure you have too, CeCee, is many of our urban congregations have been using rent as a way to make their budget, and then COVID came.
Yeah.
And so it's good to have some of that, but if you rely on it too much, you can be burned pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I also want us to think about rent as more than just an exchange, a transactional exchange. What's it about?
Yes, right. So rent is an opportunity to build relationships.
Right.
So that you have an opportunity, someone that has need of your asset, and how do you do that? So, but we will talk more about that. This was not meant to make you leave here and think, I've got it all, I can share this with someone else. This was a beginning. So we have started with a biblical foundation. I have primed the pump with some deeper questions. I will give you homework, but that does not mean the next time you come, I expect you to have the answers to all those questions I gave to you. One of the key things I want to re-emphasize is that when you go out and do your exploration, you need to do it with community members. Not members of your congregation, but members of the community. Because they will have a different eye on different things. They will know the story behind that building that lies in disrepair, or that thing that's boarded up, or that empty hill where the house used to be. They will have some of that information. So you need to work on the authentic relationships before you do the exploration. But in the meantime, you are able to figure out, how can we do an assessment of our own assets? There's some asset mapping exercises that are available. I'm going to request that if you do one of those, you don't use them to plan to do a particular thing. Oftentimes when we do the asset mapping, we'll use the sticky note. We'll put them on the wall. We'll rearrange them until we come up with something that we can do with those particular assets. That's not what this is. I do think you need to know what gifts are within the congregation. What people have financial gifts. If there's a doctor, you need to know those gifts are there. If your building is a gift or an eyesore, you need to be able to assess that. But that's going to be part of your homework to figure out how will you do the assessment. It's not to do the assessment. It's to think about how will you assess the assets that are within your congregation. And I want you to think about who would go with you if you did an exploration from your community. If you say, well, I don't have a good relationship, but I know James lives in the community and James knows everybody that's important. He knows the informal people that are important and the formal, the elected people that are. So I would go to James and ask him, who does he suggest? And so I want you to think about that. Who would go with you and how will you determine your assets? And we'll email this out to you. If you are a church outside of an urban setting, the bonus question, who can you help to explore their community? So if you are a church that's in a suburb, is there a congregation you've been kind of aligning with, or is there a congregation that may be on the radar? One of the things that we'll talk about in the next section is what happens if you get pushback from your congregation? What happens if they say, no, we don't want to be out there with those people? We have one here in North Carolina, and they got a gate. They got no trespassing signs. They got all of these things. They worship 6 people now, including the pastor and his wife. So we've actually started a new mission church within their walls. And the mission church came in. We gave them money from an endowment that we had to refurbish the building. They took down the gate. They built a playground so that the community people could come play, took down all the no trespassing signs to allow them to recognize this is the community's land. And now the kids come in. I did a short filling in while the pastor went on maternity leave. The mission developer went on maternity leave. Kids were coming in now asking for ices or going in the refrigerator themselves. It was wonderful because it became a community space and a community asset. So we're going to talk about, dealing with the pushback later. I don't know if it'll be in the next session, probably the session after that. We'll really talk about how do you deal with the pushback, because there's going to be pushback. Anytime God moves, it upsets somebody. If you're not upsetting anybody, you're probably not moving with God. So understand that. So we'll have those 3 questions. 2, if you're a community that's in an urban setting, and then a bonus question for those who are not in the urban setting. We will really look at how do we invest in our community and invest in the common good in such a way that it gives enough provision to sustain the church, which is a part of the community, and also to sustain those individuals that are part of the community, so that we see things as a common good. That was a whole lot. Thank you all for hanging in there. I always like to leave time for questions. What questions do you have? Good. This means I must have done my job right. They won't fire me.
So just a reminder, what will happen is we've been recording this session. I do think we ended up recording even the one breakout that CeCee and Richard and I did, but that's okay. We'll just see what that looks like and what we talked about. And then I will also follow through reminding you, providing you with the homework that CeCe's got a homework sheet. And then she's just put up here. Keep in mind that the hope of this was that we would begin with this session, and then you also have the opportunity to regather with Reverend CeCee 3 more times, and the dates are right in front of you. I'll put them in the email though too. So it will be Thursday, October 15th, just from 6:30 to 8 though. We're only going to be an hour and a half on those sessions. Thursday, November 5th, 6:30 to 8, and Thursday, January 14th, 6:30 to 8. Those will be a time when there'll be certainly content, but we'll also continue to do time of sharing, or even a little bit of time of quiet time of thinking about strategies as you need. So those, please, we hope that you will join. As I said, we're We're going to send you the recordings. So if there were people that you want to be with this system that weren't able to make it tonight, they can listen to that as well as look at the presentation. And please bring them on those future dates. We're delighted to have whoever can be here and whoever has an interest to explore this generosity and partnerships within community more. Just please.
Great. Bishop, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say thank you, but also thanking Karen and the generosity team for gathering us. How wonderful it's been, and to welcome those from outside our synod to add to our learning and our conversation. I'll also tell you, Pastor CeCee, I'm looking around this room, around this table, and I will tell you there are a lot of people at this table who have done that kind of work that you were talking about with that mission congregation. I'm looking at this room and I can see, congregations whose gates were always locked are now open. One church whose gate is gone. One church whose doors are perpetually propped open.
Yeah.
And so it's just exciting to see the movement of the Spirit in this unfolding gift of God's grace. So thank you for being with us. You are a gift too, Pastor CeCee.
Aw. It's good to be here. So I like to close with the Lord's Prayer. And if you want to unmute yourself, you can't. It will sound like a cacophony, but that's okay with me. If you want to stay muted, that's fine as well. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this daily bread.
Our daily bread.
And forgive us our trespasses,
As we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
deliver us from
The
evil. Thine is the
power,
kingdom,
and the glory,
and the
forever and
glory,
ever.
forever and
and
ever.
ever. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all. I hope to see you next time.